Benvenuti su Data Bit by Bit, il podcast ufficiale di BitBang, dove i dati prendono vita. Vuoi rendere la tua organizzazione più data-driven e costruire una strategia scalabile nel tempo? Sei nel posto giusto. Scopriamo insieme il vero potenziale dei dati, un bit alla volta.
Benvenute e benvenuti a una nuova puntata di Data Bit by Bit, il podcast di BitBang dove esploriamo il mondo dei dati e il valore che rappresentano per le aziende. Oggi abbiamo il piacere di ospitare Chris Adelman, fondatore della Customer Data Alliance e CEO del CDP Institute, di cui, come sapete, BitBang è partner da molto tempo e ne rappresentiamo il chapter italiano. Con Chris parleremo naturalmente di customer data, di come le aziende si stanno muovendo oggi e di cosa conta davvero quando si cerca di trasformarli in valore. Per parlare con Chris passeremo all'inglese, ma se ci seguite su YouTube potete attivare i sottotitoli anche in italiano. Good morning, Chris. Welcome to Data Bit by Bit. Thank you for being with us.
Good morning, Clara. Thanks for having me.
So, let's jump to our favorite topic, customer data platforms. They were born as a solution to specific problems that marketers were having and are probably still having. And over the years, this solution has gone through several evolutions. 1 year ago, the narrative was that CDPs were moving from marketing tools to enterprise data infrastructure, with the composability topic being highly in focus. Has that transition actually happened, or is the market still in between?
Well, if you compare the CDP market today to where it stood a year ago, the biggest shift is not technical, it's practical. A year ago, the dominant story, as you indicated, was that CDPs were becoming enterprise data infrastructure. At the same time, composable or warehouse native CDPs were framed as the future, sometimes even as replacements for packaged CDPs. Our industry update of February 2026, which reviews data collected across the last half of 2025, showed something more grounded. The market did not converge around one model. It did not split into two camps either. Instead, it matured around a clear question. And that question is, who is responsible for maintaining consistent customer context across systems? As you can imagine, context is becoming increasingly important, particularly with respect to AI and AI implementations, generative AI implementations especially. So as AI becomes embedded in marketing workflows, who is responsible for maintaining consistent customer context becomes the question. And who is not just who, but actually where is that context available from, and how is it controlled? So that shift matters more than any deployment to date.
From what you see working with companies today, how are customer data and AI actually being used across marketing? What are marketers' most pressing needs and which results are most difficult to achieve?
Obviously, needs from the standpoint of marketing change from organization to organization, from vertical to vertical. It's a difficult question to answer in the sense of what are the requirements of a given company from the standpoint of marketing. What if we go back to the original thesis that what were the things that we learned, what changed between the last year's framing of the issue around CDPs to what we're looking at today. One of the biggest questions that arose over 2025 was around warehouse-driven implementations or deployments. And so if you look at customer needs from the standpoint of what do I do now with respect to packaged CDPs or composable, then one of the important, possibly the most important clarifications that we learn with respect to this need or requirement would be the separation between what a CDP does and how it's deployed. So again, if looking at needs, there are different types of CDPs and they vary there are names for them. Then they vary from data, analytics, campaign, and delivery. That's how we define them at the CDP Institute. With respect to how they're deployed, then we're looking at that question and that requirement to understand whether or not to deploy a packaged CDP or a warehouse native CDP, or nowadays a dual mode or hybrid CDP. And so the distinction between deployment versus a category helps clarify, I think, the requirements and needs for a lot of people concerned around CDPs, not so much around marketing as a whole, but certainly with respect to CDPs. So as an indication that composable is not really a type of CDP, rather it's a deployment model, we now have 56 vendors supporting, out of about 217, supporting warehouse native deployments, but only about 6 pure play warehouse native, and that's growing. Pure play warehouse native vendors therefore represent about 5% of total CDP deployed. So I guess not therefore, but certainly that's what came out in our report. That 5% refers to employment share, by the way, not revenue share or market adoption. These vendors are growing quickly, but they're growing from a small base. And more importantly, many packaged CDPs also now support warehouse native configurations. So the market is not choosing one or the other, it's mixing both. If you refer back to our report or download our report, you'll see that we make this point fairly clearly. Composability is becoming a deployment characteristic, not a defining market position. And I think this makes it easier for marketing teams and organizations to wrap their head around their requirements with respect to one or the other.
So are you suggesting that clients should think through two parallel dimensions? One is, what do you need the CDP to do? And then the technical requirements about how do you need it to be deployed.
I think that's accurate. And I think that framing the CDP within what you need it to do becomes increasingly important. CDPs are transforming, they're not disappearing. They're not going away, right? There was this concern that kind of AI is going to kill the CDP. You don't need CDPs anymore because of AI. And also you have cloud data warehouses, and those cloud data warehouses now store all the data. So you don't really need a packaged CDP at all. And what we're finding is that each deployment model has its strengths and its trade-offs, right? So packaged CDPs in principle could provide faster time to value. There could be less strain on internal teams. So you could use your existing resources to implement and leverage a packaged CDP. They have built-in identity resolution and activation tools. Everything's built in. And then you have this, it's managing the storage of the customer data. But at the same time, if you're using a data warehouse, then you're going to have some duplication of data. You've got less direct control over infrastructure decisions because you've got this sort of monolithic implementation, so it's less flexible, and so forth and so on. Also, greater reliance on vendor data structures. With warehouse native solutions, which, if we look at AI, they make a lot of sense when you think about cloud data warehouses and how cloud data warehouses are important also with respect to the advent of AI. You have centralized data control. You've got alignment with internal data engineering workflows. You've got reduced data movement. You have greater flexibility with respect to how you implement and what you implement, because you can rely on existing solutions that are already within your stack. So the idea of composability is you're breaking things out into components, and your CDP begins to look like a set of services, right? So we actually call those within our report customer data services. So you have this greater flexibility. Potentially you have a greater need for internal resources. It can make your implementation more complex because the implementation, the deployment model is inherently, or by definition, more complex. You get greater architectural flexibility, but then at what cost? So that would be the trade-off. It's not a monolithic solution, and there are other trade-offs as well potentially. But and all of these, I think any vendor will argue each of the points that I've mentioned. So we try not to make too many inferences from our data. Your interpretation of the trade-offs will depend on your organization, your requirements, and what you have implemented and so forth, your teams, their capabilities, and your overall data maturity and so forth. Then, of course, there's the dual mode, and that kind of combines both approaches. The warehouse manages the core data while package tools provide identity resolution or marketing orchestration. This would be a sort of a practical coexistence and reflects the reality that different teams have different needs. And many companies we're funding also that they'll have multiple CDPs deployed. It's a long-winded response to your question.
Thank you. And building on that, looking back at the past year, have companies, in your view, sometimes overestimated the role of technology and maybe underestimated the importance of getting data foundations right?
I think that a lot of organizations have been considering their data foundations for quite some time now. In fact, as AI has become popular, it's there's no question that data hygiene, data governance, your data maturity, and not just with respect to the lower layer of the data, right? Your data architecture and so forth, but also with respect to your marketing stack and your application stack, how those impact also. I think all those questions have been considered for quite some time. I think AI has forced the issue. And I think that with respect to CDPs, where they were kind of blamed for complexity and difficult implementations, particularly with respect to, you can't deploy a CDP well or get a lot of value from a CDP if you don't have your data act together, right? The same holds true for AI. So the beauty of this is that those organizations who took this seriously and really did their homework with respect to data hygiene and data governance and identity resolution and so forth, they are now in a great position with respect to it because they have all of this homework already done. So in this sense, this is also, AI has had this impact of changing expectations. A year ago, AI was discussed as an enhancement. Today, it's assumed, right? With regard to AI in marketing. So if you look at CDPs today, it's assumed that there's going to be a native AI capabilities. But a year ago, you wouldn't have heard, right? So if you think about what AI depends on, and again, this is with respect to this kind of question about, how AI and what role does the CDP play with respect to AI and your data? AI depends on persistent customer identity, governed data, reliability across systems, reliable access across systems. In this sense, AI increases the cost of fragmented customer data. And that is kind of gets back to what I was saying about it's not just the bottom layer, the data layer that you need to be thinking about, but the actual stack where you have overlapping solutions and solutions which you probably need to think about either consolidating or unwinding, all of which now have native AI capabilities. Again, overlapping, all of this potentially creates fragmentation. And this is where, again, AI increases the cost of fragmented data. It also tends to increase the problem, right, that fragmented data represents.
So you said that AI is not going to kill CDPs. You also explained how AI and CDPs are actually reinforcing each other's need for clean, high quality, well governed customer data.
That's correct. Yeah.
And from a functional point of view, where is AI going to create real leverage for our clients, for companies when working with customer data?
I mean, that's the big question, right? And how do we leverage it? A lot of each company, each vendor is addressing that issue in different ways. For a while, everyone talked about those native AI capabilities within CDP or CEP or CRM and so forth are table stakes. They have to be there, right? You have to be doing something with AI, and so there's some organizations that are looking at the CDP as kind of an opportunity to be the orchestrator of agents, of AI agents. There are companies that are taking a different kind of look and seeing the CDP more as the control plane. Helps you to understand your and implement and execute your AI strategy. So you can think of it as a policy engine for AI agents. Not just policy, but that would be where you implement your strategy, and where you again, you still do your identity stitching, and you do your governance and your auditing. And auditing is going to be increasingly important, with respect to who takes action on what, and who has responsibility for those actions. Because if agents start taking action, who has responsibility ultimately? There are other organizations that consider the CDP as a critical component with respect to providing context for AI agents, right? Almost as sort of a context engine. So if you think of the AI agents as sitting on top of the data and enabling you to strategize, create policies, implement those policies, orchestrate agents, manage outcomes, get feedback from campaigns that leverage agents, and then take that feedback and disseminate it across your marketers, your infrastructure, your resources, and then going back and adjusting your policy, and managing in that way. You end up in this sort of interesting cycle where, again, the CDP becomes this control plane for AI.
Thank you. That's very interesting. Now let's try and think to fast forward a few years. What will separate companies that truly have been able to create value from their customer data from those that simply added more tools and more tech? What will they have done differently, in your view, of course?
This is kind of the science fiction question. And I think this is really, again, open to interpretation. I find that now with, in this new age that we find ourselves with, different types of AI, right? We typically, when we think of AI in marketing, we're thinking of it, generative AI, but there's also predictive AI and other types of AI. And so what are we doing? Where are things going? And how are they going to be in the future? In 6 months' time, it's hard to say. Things are changing so quickly. I used to think that, personally, that this concept of vibe coding was overblown. And if you look at just AI coding, and you can think of this, well, what does that have to do with marketing, right? Well, one of the vendors that came out in the news with a press release recently talked about our command line interface. Right? And so I think a number of marketing solutions out there are going to implement CLIs for marketing. So marketing is going to become programmable, right? And if anybody who's worked with Claude or other Copilot or other coding tools can tell you that there's very little coding you actually have to do anymore. It's the hands-on coding that we're talking about is really conceptual, it's architectural. It's increasingly that way. And novices actually can create applications. I can tell you from personal experience, I haven't coded since I was in college, and I don't want to tell you how long ago. And I didn't take very much programming. I didn't like it that much. Now I can work with Claude and Anthropic, and I have actually created a marketing tool, an automated newsletter generation tool that will go out and actually add value to the curated news that we used to spend a lot of time trying to find. Now I can go through 800 sources of news, and I can look at each individual news piece and determine where the trend is. And then I can take that trend or that pattern. That AI is very good, because ultimately AI, the way we use it right now, is a super pattern matcher. And it will tell me certain patterns that are not humanly possible to find. And when I find the right one that makes a lot of sense, I can then publish that. And so I think that changes the nature of news. And when you begin to think about the ability for anybody to create an application in a matter of days, and I'm talking about a fairly complex application in a matter of days, it changes the nature of software across the board. So the idea that AI was going to eliminate CDPs or make them superfluous or unnecessary, that same thing is happening in every software industry. And I think it's less a question of do CDPs become another victim of AI. I think it's more, how is AI changing everything? And how are we going to individually in the future, in just 6 months, things will be radically different from the and we're already finding that out with respect to employment and teams, how we organize teams, what those teams will be doing, the level of technical understanding of those teams, at least at a high level, probably will deepen. Anyway, I could go on and on, but I think the answer is really, I have no idea. I know things are going to change radically. And in fact, I think probably the way you have to look at things in your particular industry is one of, let's just use this. Let's get going on it. Let's work. This is why a lot of companies are actually taking this sort of standpoint. Let's start working with AI, and in marketing, I think it's no different. Let's use it everywhere, potentially where we can save some time, effort, increase quality, reduce costs, and then we will learn how that will impact what we're trying to do, right? And that learning will then advance AI even more. And so it's this snowball effect. So that's why, again, it's very hard to predict what's going to happen. One of the issues that we're going to be facing is energy. So if you look at news as a great example, if you look at an emailings, right? Anybody who's trying to impact a market with their press releases and their information, at some point, it's an intelligence exercise. So when I talk about trends, I'm talking about market intelligence, right? A newsletter is no longer just news, it's market intelligence. And it's market intelligence at a pretty deep level. I think that we may see organizations seeding the news as a form of PR, as opposed to issuing press releases, actually seeding information that can be consumed by AI in a way that will then further the efforts and the commercial efforts of the organization. And what does that mean? It means you're manipulating results. And how do you do it? It's science fiction. If you go on and on.
Yeah. Well, I love how your example focuses on leveraging opportunities that arise thanks to AI, leveraging the shortcuts, trying things, being ready to learn, but you always focus on adding value and doing something that was just not possible before, not just doing the same thing quicker or with less effort. That's an insight I really like. So Thank you, Chris. This has been a very insightful chat. It's been a pleasure having you on board, and we have already run out of our time now, but I hope there will be more opportunities to delve into these topics together.
The pleasure has been all mine, Clara. Thank you so much for the chance to get together with you.
Thank you. Oh, and since you mentioned the report that the CDP Institute produced recently, maybe you want to say to our listeners how they can get it?
Oh yeah, the CDP industry update for the first half or the second half of 2025 is available on the website at https://cdpinstitute.org, and just you'll be able to find it in the library. You will only be able to download it if you're a member, but membership is free. So become a member, get our newsletter, tell me what you think about it, and hopefully, and that will be evolving. Hopefully we'll be creating dynamic newsletters, individualized on a per person basis at some point.
We're looking forward to it.
Sounds
Thank
good.
you. Thank you. See you next time.
Thank you.
Grazie a voi tutti per averci seguito. Fateci avere i vostri commenti, condividete il podcast se l'avete trovato interessante e l'appuntamento, come sempre, è per la prossima puntata. Arrivederci.
Grazie per essere stati con noi su Data Bit by Bit. Se ti è piaciuto l'episodio, seguici e lascia una recensione. Rimani in contatto con noi su bitbang.com. A presto, con nuovi bit!